The next article I wanted to talk about is titled Law Professor, Kids Shouldn't Need Parental Consent to Avoid Saying the Pledge. This is written by Hemant Mehta on the Friendly Atheist website, and I wanted to give this article a read particularly because it's actually pretty important to me personally. When I was growing up, I wasn't allowed to say the Pledge of Allegiance because I was a Jehovah's Witness when I was little. And it was just one more thing that set me aside from the rest of the kids. I wasn't allowed to celebrate the holidays. I wasn't allowed to do the whole Valentine's thing where all the kids pass out Valentines to each other and you all have pouches on the side of your desk, you know? Wasn't allowed to take part. Wasn't allowed to do anything Christmas related or Halloween related. It actually cut out a big part of the socialization that I had in school and set me apart from everybody else. I don't know what Jehovah's Witnesses' goal really is in preventing their people from saying the Pledge of Allegiance or celebrating the holidays or whatever. I don't know if their goal is to segregate their people from the rest of society, but that was its effect on me, and it wasn't good. With all that being said, I do want to point out, I am actually not in favor of saying the Pledge of Allegiance. I think it's antiquated and fucking weird, and we absolutely shouldn't do it. Seriously, think about the words that you're saying. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Think about that. Why are you saying those words? That's fucking strange. You are pledging your allegiance to a government and a flag and shit like that? Why is a 5-year-old doing this? This should not exist, in my opinion. Anyways, let's read this article and see exactly what's going on here. As regular readers of this site know, public school students don't have to say the Pledge of Allegiance in school. And by the way, on a personal note, the reason that law exists that allows us to is in part thanks to Jehovah's Witnesses. They fought that legal battle to not say the Pledge of Allegiance. I actually knew the woman who fought the battle. Her name was Gaithy Barnett. And you can look up the case. I think it's United States v. Barnett or something like that. I don't remember the exact case, but I knew her personally. She died when I was, 12 or 13 or something. Went over to her house all the time. She had lawyers coming over and talking to her and interviewing her from time to time about the cases. Let's get back to the article. They have every right to stand silently or remain seated during the pledge. Some students chose that option because they're atheists who don't believe we're a nation under God, while others don't because they know we don't actually have liberty and justice for all. Whatever reason, students can't be punished for their refusal to say the pledge. It took a couple of important legal battles to solidify that right. There's an excellent podcast explaining the details, but that's the law, except in 2 states, Florida and Texas. It's always Florida and Texas, isn't it? Yes, it is. In those states, the law says students can only get out of saying the pledge if they have their parents' permission. What happens if you're a student who doesn't want to say the pledge, but you don't have the support of your parents? Too bad. You're out of luck. Something I find interesting about this is the United States can't compel speech. How can you honestly be forced to say something? Seriously, sit down and think about this for a minute. How can you be forced to say something by your government? That is absurd. Completely absurd. Let's keep reading. In Texas in 2018, a case was settled without deciding that question. In Florida in 2008, however, the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals ruled narrowly in favor of a particular student who didn't want to say the pledge, but ultimately allowed the law to stand. Parents still had power. This is a quote. The state, in restricting the student's freedom of speech, advances the protection of the constitutional rights of parents. We also recognize that a parent's right to interfere with the wishes of his child is stronger than a public school official's right to interfere on behalf of the school's own interests. We conclude that the state's interest in recognizing and protecting the rights of parents on some educational issues is sufficient to justify the restriction of some students' freedom of speech. This is Hemant Mehta speaking. Now, Caroline Mala Corbin, a professor of law at University of Miami, who has written extensively on church-state separation, has published a paper that will soon appear in the Indiana Law Journal, picking apart the problems with the 11th Circuit ruling. I won't go into all the details here. The paper isn't written for a lay audience, though it's easy to read and really gets to the heart of why students alone should be deciding whether or not to stand for the pledge. But essentially, Corbin argues that the justifications Florida and Texas have used in giving parents the authority to force their kids to say the pledge make no sense and ought to be overturned. Here's another quote. Forcing students to pledge against their will exemplify all the harms of compelled speech. The claim that parents' constitutional rights to control the upbringing of their children justifies making the right to refuse contingent on parental permission understands the nature of the parent's right. It's meant to protect the parents from the state, not to empower parents to trample on the rights of their children. In short, a law that demands recitation of the pledge also means it demands affirmation of some viewpoints over others. A compulsion anathema to free speech. Absolutely agreed. I couldn't possibly agree with this anymore. Seriously, how can anybody justify compelling speech from anybody, even kids? I understand that kids need to be protected to some degree from certain things. Like, for example, we can't allow kids to go around smoking tobacco. We can't allow kids to go drinking alcohol and stuff. I get that. Those are restrictions on kids that adults don't have that I'm okay with. There are a lot of restrictions on kids I'm okay with for their own safety. But that's for safety reasons. Ultimately, it boils down to compelled speech. You are forcing kids to say something or to do something that has no tangible benefit whatsoever, aside from inspiring patriotism. It's fucking disgusting. It shouldn't work that way. The rest of the country has realized that it shouldn't work that way and is on board 100%, but for some bizarre reason, Texas and Florida cannot get over themselves and remain the hang-up on this straightforward issue. It blows my mind. How is this law even legal anyways? I thought this was decided at a federal level, and states can't override the federal level. That was my understanding of how it works. Obviously, I don't fully understand how it's all structured. I don't fully understand the laws and all that stuff, but it just seems nonsensical to me at its face that Florida and Texas can force kids to do this. Here's another quote. The decision whether to participate or not participate in the Pledge of Allegiance does not carry potential serious consequences. Indeed, exercising this decision-making is crucial to developing their capacities as future citizens, the avowed goal of public school education. This is from Hemant Mehta again. All of this is sensible. There are solid reasons judges should overturn these laws if they're ever challenged in the future. No students should have to say the pledge if they don't want to, and it shouldn't matter if their parents agree with them. I absolutely agree. Parents should have the final say in certain things, like, for example, medical decisions, or whether or not the kid's allowed to get a tattoo. I think a parent should have a say in that. Or getting married, parents should probably have the say in that. Things that could seriously, adversely affect a kid's life when their brains may not be fully developed enough to make such a serious decision. Say 6 years old. Kid is not old enough to decide, I want to be married. A parent shouldn't even be making that decision for a 6-year-old. The state should say you're not allowed to do that yet. But parents should have final say. There should be like a protective buffer to prevent kids from making horrifically bad decisions that will affect their lives until the end. But saying the Pledge of Allegiance is not one of those things. Why is saying the pledge or even standing for the pledge important in the first place? Why do we say it in the first place? There is no justification for Texas and Florida preventing kids from just sitting down for it, or just standing and not saying it. No justification for that. I say this as a former Jehovah's Witness, but now I'm saying it as an atheist who's absolutely disgusted by this repetitive chanting that we shouldn't be doing as a society anyways.